the average NFL player isn't in for 20 years, just like an average special.
What is the average on the NFL? It's not.
I'm not sure.
Long.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's not long. It's probably less than we think because there's so many of them that we don't know about.
All right. Excellent. We have Zack Hughes here with us at GPT Leaders, with GPT Leaders at the summit here, and we're going to talk a little bit about, Zack, your background, what it has to do with leaders in this space, blockchain industry, and Bitcoin, and tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Born and raised here in Fort Worth, so very excited that the blockchain summit's here. Very honored to be involved in this. I think it's
we brought it just for you.
Great for the city. Yeah, I wish. Moved back here in July. I kind of spent about 18 years out of the city for college and military. My background's in special operations, so I spent all my time as a Green Beret, all in the Army Special Forces arena. So most of my adult life was spent in the military, specifically under special operations. And on my Special Forces team, I was kind of the nerd. And so I was the guy that was in charge of communications and technologies and satellites and cybersecurity stuff. I think quick difference between SEAL teams and Special Forces teams in the Army. SEAL teams really have a lot of assets that come help them. They bring in their own cyber guys, their own security guys, their own tech guys that help support the shooters, essentially. In Special Forces, we're tasked with going out and living among the population for a long time. And so we all go very deep in those. And so you have to have a medic guy, a communication/cyber guy, an engineer, so that you can go live out there. And so we go very deep on that stuff. And, we got to play with a lot of top secret technology that was kind of emerging tech at the time that really just turned my eyes on to all the new and emerging things that were going on. And I dove in. Not only did I want to be great at my job, but I fell into it in terms of entertainment. And so I dove into blockchain. I dove into crypto, somewhere around 2017, really hard, just because it was an emerging technology. And I was trying to find ways we could use the blockchain, frankly. And instead, I kind of found like a little bit of a hobby at the time for me.
A little bit of a hobby, and has turned into a little bit more than a hobby over time.
It did, yeah. It turned into a little bit. First was just how can we use smart contracts? How can we use the technology of blockchain to further develop what we're doing in the special operations arena? And then I was like, well, wait a second. There's this thing called crypto that I should probably pay attention to too. Is just in terms of being an investor. We built a few small bootstrapped organizations in the blockchain. We built a DAO and kind of started tinkling our toes in that. And I just kind of started evolving from it. And that took us to the AI space. And now we've got entire conferences that are about convergence, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of the programs that are being built out there, the blockchain and AI. There's that moment where you're trying to get overcome the technical barrier for the population. Some people don't lean into that. They're not educating themselves on it. It's a lot of work to kind of get themselves up on it. Do you feel that your background gave you a little bit of a leg up in that arena?
Well, I think that my background, a big core tenet of Special Forces, because of the job I just told you, where we got to go live out there with these indigenous populations essentially and train them, is adaptability. And so you got to be quick to adapt. You got to have a great plan, kind of like Mike Tyson told us, but everybody gets punched in the mouth, and then you have to adapt. And frankly, you have to adapt faster than everybody else on the battlefield. And so that was our posture. That was kind of how I was brought up in the special operations arena. And so when this technology started coming, well, I did what I was told basically, and I started to adapt, and I started to kind of learn and lean in. And it's a transition, right? We got a lot of old heads in the military, like we do in business, that were like, we don't need to look at this stuff. We need to focus on what we've always been doing. And I just tried to focus in on the special operations lens of adapt quickly and at least try to be an expert in this as fast as possible. And so I don't know if it gave me a leg up, but definitely confidence to adapt rapidly, and almost like some anxiety that I have to adapt rapidly, frankly.
How you're in a field that forces you to adapt. A lot of people, they're not, you can be comfortable. You don't necessarily need to adapt. You can sit in your ways for a little bit. What do you think the average person that's in the market, that's out there working, how should they approach that adaptability standpoint? How do they keep that top of mind? What's your recommendation on that?
Well, I think it first starts with focus. You have to know what's right to adapt to. And I think blockchain and emerging technology is huge, but you don't want to spend a lot of energy on something that would be a lost cause or a sunk time for you. And so once you've identified that this is worth adapting for, because I think anytime you take on something new, you lose something. You lose a bandwidth, you lose a hobby, you lose some focus on something else. And so once you've identified this one thing is important to attack, then you have to go all in. And that's kind of where my experience in special operations was from. Very analytical in the first phase. Do we want to dive into this? Do we want to sacrifice some other things that we're working on, culturally, family, business wise, in order to pay attention to this emerging technology? And then once we do, it's unapologetic because we've made that decision and it's full steam ahead. And I think that's sometimes where people that are in business tend to kind of drag their feet, because maybe they skip through the analytic part of, is this worth my time? Is this going to be a compounding effect? Is this the thing that I should pay attention to? And once you've identified that, you've already made the determination that that's what you should pay attention to. So you kind of owe yourself to it. And that's probably my special operations perspective. But carrying that through all of these transitions is served us really well and served a lot of our team really well.
Now, when you talk about adapting, we were talking a little bit before the show, just because some of the work that you're doing with veterans as they come out of the military, and that I lost, the switch in identity. I think it seems like in the military, there's a very hard line where there's a change that you have to actually face that. And for professionals, it seems to be a little bit more day by day. Unless you lose your job, you can kind of stick in the same rut with it. What correlations and what differences do you see between the military and professionals that are in the space?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be around great leaders, and it started in special operations, and it's been the same in the civilian aspect as I've transitioned. And for my first few years as I transitioned from special forces to being a civilian, I was blessed to be able to help a nonprofit organization scale. And inside that capacity, we were helping transitioning Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and all special operators pivot to business. So if you wanted to be a shooter, you weren't for us. But if you wanted to go the MBA route, the engineer route, if you wanted to be a consultant, some aspect of business or an entrepreneur, we would help you and put you in the right rooms, essentially. And in that capacity, we got connected to Jerry Jones, and Jerry Jones fortunately asked us to be the philanthropic partner to his Global Sports Summit. And in that small event that he has with NFL owners, NHL owners, MLB owners, all they were talking about was disruptions. And that was my first time as a civilian seeing elite businessmen focus on that adaptability in my mind. All they talked about what's coming for our sport, what's coming for our business, what's next, how can we pivot fast? And they just had presenters and speakers all day for this thing. And that got us a little bit into pro sports, but my hugest takeaway out of that was, okay, in special operations, we saw that we need to adapt. And now these elite businessmen that own these NFL teams, who own these MLB teams, that's all they're talking about here. They all come together once a year from all over the world. All they're talking about is adapting, is disruptions. What should we be doing next? How fast should we be doing it? And that really calcified my understanding as a civilian now in business, that I have to be just as aggressive with the adaptability and the transitions of what I'm putting my mind into in terms of emerging tech as a businessman, just like I did in special forces. And I think that one event, frankly, and the leaders that I met there and the friends that I made through that experience has been the catalyst to keep me pushing forward with the same aggressive mindset that I had when I was in.
And you've done a bit with sports players now, with some of the different sports teams, helping them make that transition, just on the military side, and also on the football side.
Yeah, it's an identity pivot. Very much like a corporate America worker or a leader inside corporate America is needing to go through this transition, possibly to look at blockchain or look at AI. Military members have been in a bubble their whole life, focusing on one thing, and then they jump out of it and they got to be a civilian. Well, the average NFL player isn't in for 20 years, just like an average special.
What is the average on the NFL? It's not.
I'm not
it's not
sure.
long.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's not long. It's probably less than we think, because there's so many of them that we don't know about. And it's the same identity pivot. It's the same transition. You have to be just as aggressive. You have to be just as aggressive as your transition into the civilian world as a special operator as you were getting in. I always counsel my guys, like, remember that energy you had when you came into the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets? You got to keep that, and you got to use that for your transition as a civilian. We shared that with a few teams along the way in terms of their members that were NFL players and now transitioning to be a businessman or be a civilian. It's the same thing I see with corporate America and this digital transformation that we're very early on, I think, right now. Is, first of all, you have to decide that this is worth it. And then secondly, you've got to be just as aggressive in this transformation as you were when your bosses or the old heads before you probably transitioned to the internet in general. They were aggressive with it at some point. And I think that we're kind of seeing now that once you make that decision, you need to be as aggressive as other people have been in the past.
Where do you see that you mentioned that word energy,
Yeah.
and where do you see leaders and business owners, operators tap back into it? How do they tap back into it? How do they solve for that energy? The guys that are successful with it, they attack it aggressively. If people don't feel the energy, they don't have the energy, they're trying to solve for that. How do they solve for that? How do you recommend
Well, I mean, so if you were in my organization and you didn't have the energy, I'd kind of give you 3 strikes and we'd move on. And I mean that. It's like that's the analysis phase of this, right? You gotta be bought into the idea that this is the future. This is the way ahead. And I don't subscribe to the policy where I'll teach you that that's important, and I don't. And so I think that's kind of coming for everybody. But you know, we talked a little bit about this beforehand, the lack of leadership and the lack of kind of aggressive leaders that are willing to pivot. And for me, I've just found so much success with having energy of things that I was excited about. After I decided that they're worth my time and energy and I can sacrifice other pieces of my life to move forward with this, then it needs to be the same amount of energy you use to rise up the corporate ladder, to build that organization, to become a Navy SEAL, to work out so hard that you made it to the NFL. Because that's the reason that you have this asterisk next to your name. That's the reason you've been successful in general. You have to understand that in your next lifeline and the next aspect and the next transition, if you don't have that it factor you had before, well, you're not going to be successful. And it might be kind of rough, but that's just the truth in my opinion.
Right. I mean, it seems like you've been good at adapting. You surround yourself with guys who are adapting. You're trying to teach people how to adapt. And so if someone's not going to take that on themselves, then there's not much that you can do with it.
Well, I mean, and maybe because they're if we're talking about blockchain and AI specifically, maybe they're just so new to it that it's not worth that analysis phase for them isn't there yet.
Yeah.
Right. They need to be more present where their feet are and just keep consuming, keep being educated, keep listening, keep having an open mind to the leaders around them. And so, that's kind of where I stick at it. Maybe that person that we're talking about right now just isn't ready to go all in. I don't let anybody.
Or the incentives are misaligned for
this. Or perfect example, the incentives are misaligned. And so I don't recommend that anybody push forward with new initiatives, new transformations, new adaptability unless they're sold on it. And that analysis phase might take a while for them.
Yeah. Now, I was checking back on our notes from our conversation before, talking a little bit about the charity that you have and the work that you do with veterans, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Elite Meat is a nonprofit organization. I was a phase 2 guy for that. So I wasn't the founder or anything. I kind of came into a good team. It was a few Navy SEALs, and they were connecting to guys in business. And they were like, hey, we all want to go into finance, basically. We're going to go to Wharton. We're going to go to Harvard. And we want great jobs. Let's get in the same room. And we had a few bankers early on that connected them. And then they started a nonprofit, and I heard about it. And I was selfishly joined because I was getting out of the military. I was injured. My time in service was cut short. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I reached out to them to selfishly use their services, and I found a new home. And I started volunteering and helping, got hired on as a director of operations and subsequently the COO. And a guy, Gary Vaynerchuk's team, if you're familiar with him, reached out to us, VaynerMedia, and said, hey guys, y'all got something really special here, but you need to build a community and you need to start posting on social media. And so the energy there of building that, what's landed us in the Global Sports Summit, was awesome. And I was blown away by helping the heroes. The reason that I joined, the guys that I stood on their shoulders in the military that had spent 20 plus years in special operations, watching them get 6-figure and up jobs, get into the schools that they wanted and move forward was so refreshing and reminded me of like so much more energy.
It's like a new lease on life.
It is. And that identity pivot we talked about with NFL players. And so I'm out the door on that organization now. I no longer serve in that capacity. I kind of started some other businesses and did my own pivot, my own adaptability and moving on.
Identity.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so happy to say I'm still the largest fundraiser for the organization, but I'm out the door and the day-to-day completely. And there's a new C-suite that's executing the mission, but they're doing great stuff for our veterans for sure.
Who are you working with right now? Who is a good person to reach out to you? What's that person look like?
In terms of reaching out to me?
Yeah, reaching out to you, reaching out to the organizations that you're involved with right now.
Yeah, so I've got a small portfolio of bootstrapped organizations. My largest capacity is GPT Leaders. So what we do inside there is we help upscale the average worker with large language models and generative AI. And so I've got a team of people that are way smarter than me that kind of run it in a more full-time capacity. But, we found product market fit throughout this year of testing, frankly, and this is very new for us, but this summer we landed in a spot where now we're very similar to a traditional consultant. We'll bolt onto your organization, we'll come in, we'll provide webinars, we'll provide instructions to upscale your employees, maybe your marketing staff, your strategy department, maybe your sales department or your ops, and we'll work through which generative AI is best for you, and we'll teach you how to use it.
So essentially, how to use AI in specific verticals to improve the efficiency of each of the workers.
That's
or the
exactly
verticals.
right. This beautiful conference here is very on the macro side, I would say, very like emerging tech, some of the really Gucci, like very, very fresh stuff that's high impact. And we found the best use of our time and our capacity is at the least common denominator. How can we get AI to help the individual worker? How can we make it to where like we're so paralysis by analysis right now with AI? It's bless you.
Excuse me.
That's bless you. A lot of people are stuck. There's so much to think about and so much to learn, especially for decision makers. It's like, how can I get my staff being better at their job tomorrow?
Right.
And it's like, well, Chat GPT, large language models, some of the cool things you're seeing with Bing. If our team steps over the shoulder of a decision maker or a team that's doing just day-to-day work and shows them the small, the least common denominator, I say, the low-hanging fruit, and they start to build up from there. We've seen really good success with that. So that's where we've parked our organization, and that's kind of where we stay right now.
So really give individual workers the tools to increase their efficiency, their output, which then it helps the efficiency of the organization to survive, so that people aren't concerned about AI taking away their job. It's really, how do I 10x my output?
Right. So we preach optimization, not elimination.
Yep.
And so I think that's the big thing specifically for AI. And if we can converge that with some of the blockchain stuff here pretty soon, I'm very excited about the future of it. But right now, that's the capacity of GPT Leaders.
I mean, you talked earlier about it's the it factor and finding the people. It's really about the people that you find around you. You start with that. And so if you've done a good job as a leader of finding good people, you want to keep them around. You want to give them the tools so that they can, improve their capabilities. You don't want to lose that person because, when it's hard to go find that person when you do need them again.
Oh yeah, I mean, if I took one thing away from the Special Forces community, it's people. People matter. You got to get the right person, and you kind of probably heard a little bit of my aggressiveness about that earlier. If you're not the right fit, we're going to move on, and I'm unapologetic about that because when I get the right fit with somebody, they'll be with us for life, and we'll build great things and we'll do cool stuff. And I learned that in the military. I didn't learn that in business, and I'm kind of solidifying that through our business arena. And I left the military in 2020, and so a lot of this is still very new for me. I'm very present where my feet are. I haven't been doing this for decades or anything, but I've been doing people for a while, and people have constantly brought me to the promised land.
Yep. Cool. Well, appreciate you stopping by today.
Yep.
Where can people get you on socials? I know you got some actives on socials, so share where people can get you there.
Yeah, we're real big on LinkedIn. Zack Hughes on LinkedIn. ZACK Hughes. Instagram. Got a large following on Instagram. A lot from the military space, and then Facebook as well is kind of where I park myself. I'm not on TikTok, not on YouTube or anything.
We won't go down that rabbit hole there, but no, excellent. Well, it's good. Great to have you out here, and thanks for stopping by.
Honored to be here. Really appreciate y'all's time. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.